It's Johnny and the Professor.
Common sense for senseless times.
Prayer University banned, shadow banned, blocked. Gavin McGinnis, you name it. I mean, it's everybody has been shadow banned or blocked. My family will put a pro-Trump tweet out, or hey, our economy's doing great, and they ban them for a week on Twitter. It's everyone I know. It's like Trump said in the tweets. Millions of people are being blocked from the digital commons, and people say, oh, these are private companies. You can't restrict them. They are under federal law as a digital commons. They operate under the system and under the rubric that they are not publishers, that they are simply operating systems that allow debate. And so they have admitted that they're a digital public square. But what they're doing is selectively banning nationalists, conservatives, patriots, you name it, from that digital square. The Democrats literally believe that if they get me, they've got Trump.
It's time for Johnny and the Professor.
It's Johnny and the Professor.
Common sense for senseless times.
Johnny Manson, along with Professor Arms. Good day, sir.
Good day to you, Johnny.
What have you been up to?
The things I can legally talk about?
Right. A lot of stuff going on in the wacky world of the world.
Well, I received a copy of Judge Jeanine's new book, which is Radicals, Resistance, and Revenge. Her people sent me a PDF copy of it with the watermark confidential on it. So I've got one of the ones that it may be slightly different than the released book, but I've started reading it for our interview, which of course is next week on the 14th.
I think you're getting excited for this.
I am. I find Judge Pirro to be very intelligent and good legal mind, and I'm enjoying her book. I started the first chapter, laughed half a dozen times at it.
Oh yeah.
Because she doesn't pull any punches. She's a little more brutal than even. She always taught me she's almost as conservative as Sean Hannity, but way smarter.
Speaking of funny, Dave Chappelle has a new comedy bit on Netflix. Were you able to watch it?
I was able to watch that, yes. Yeah, it was very funny.
Hilarious! He makes fun of everybody. He makes fun of white people, black people, gay people, straight people, trans people, people in between, all across the board. He makes fun of himself.
He does. It was a very good thing. I know that there were people on the left who were offended by it.
Of course they were.
It's a profession with some people on the left. You have to live in a state of constant outrage. I think that would be so exhausting. I don't understand how people can live their lives like that. He even told a story. I saw an interview of his where he was talking about that he had one particular trans man, as a woman, but a guy dressed as a lady. Okay, I get confused on the alphabet people, which is a term he uses for that. And that person kept coming to his show over and over again and was just laughing their butt off in the front row because they actually had a sense of humor about it.
It's my understanding that a lot of the people that have this outrage don't necessarily represent the people that they're outraged for. Jordan Peterson, as an example, how in Canada they were, passing laws about you had to address people by their preferred pronoun, gender pronoun or whatever, and he just flat out refused. He would get emails from trans people saying, "We're with you on this. These people that are boycotting and outraged, they don't speak for us. We never asked them to speak for us." And it kind of seems like that's the same thing here with Chappelle. The people that are outraged for these victim groups that don't care, or they see the humor in it, or they don't have a problem with it, but these other people are having a problem with it for them.
It does make you wonder. Does that make sense? I think it's an old Groucho Marx line that I would never belong to a club that would have me as a member. Right. And I'm of the opinion, sometimes I wonder about what Jordan Peterson talked about from the emails he would get, and this is again what Peterson said personally, is that if he had a trans person in his class, he would address them however they wished to have him address him if they told him
or asked him,
and they'd come and ask him, would you please, I prefer to be addressed as Miss or Janie or whatever,
and didn't he elaborate on how they asked him also? Like,
it would be how they would ask him. If as a request from one human being to another, that's fine, but his whole point was that you're requiring speech, and that is, he goes back to British common law, and he's right. Mm-hmm. There's no time in the history of the world, or at least in the British common law, in the history of the British Empire and the United States, and we're part of that history also, that you've been able to compel people to speak away. You could limit what a person can say. You can't slander people. You can't threaten people. You know, those are things. But to say that you have to say these words,
right,
or you are now breaking the law. And he made no bones about the fact that he would not do it. And if they sentenced him, if they fined him, he wouldn't pay. And if they sent him to jail, he'd go on a hunger strike. It's compelled speech. And he's right.
So I went and read all the policies. Well, one of the policies was that if you didn't use the preferred pronouns of a given group, that you could be charged essentially with a hate crime. And I thought, no,
Which given group is that? You're talking about transgender people.
Yeah, and so there's all these pronouns that have come up. There's 70 different sets of pronouns approximately to hypothetically describe people who don't fit anywhere on the gender spectrum, which is also something that I don't really understand. I don't understand that conceptually. Okay, so now a person is compelled under Canadian law to use the pronoun of another individual's choice on pain of law. And I thought, well, no, that's not acceptable. It's one thing to put limits on what a person can't say, like say with hate speech laws, which I also don't agree with, by the way, but that's a different argument. I think it's a narrower argument. But to compel me to use a certain content when I'm formulating my thoughts or my actions under threat of legislative action, I thought, no, what's happened there is the government has introduced compelled speech legislation into the private sphere. It's never happened in the history of English common law. And so I said, there's no way I'm abiding by that. I don't care what your damn rationale is. We're compassionate. It's like, no, you're not. You're playing this radical collectivist left-wing game. You're trying to gain linguistic supremacy in the area of public discourse. You're doing that using compassion as a guise, and you're pulling the wool over people's eyes, and you're not going to do it with me.
If I was sitting here in front of you as a transgendered male to female or female to male, and we began the conversation, at the beginning of the conversation you stumbled and called me he or she, and I was perhaps identifying the other way around, and then if I'd said to you, please, I'd rather go by she, how would you respond to that on a personal level? How would you?
Well, it would depend on the situation, but the way I have responded to that, because I've had a number of conversations with transgendered individuals, is that I use whatever pronoun seems to go along with the persona that they're projecting publicly. It's the simplest thing to do. Now, with the more contentious pronouns, je and je and that sort of thing, that's a whole different issue, because the question there is, well, exactly what is it that you're doing when you're asking me to use those words? Like, are you compelling me to play your particular ideological game, or is this actually a matter of some personal identity that's important to you? And those things are not obvious. In a situation like that, the first thing I'd have to do is to try to figure out just exactly what was going on in the situation, and that's not simple. And so there would be no foregone conclusion that I would address you by the pronouns of your choice. And the first thing I'd want to find out is that just a narcissistic power play? Because that's actually the most likely outcome.
When I was dealing with my own students, I always called them by their last names. They were always Mr. or Miss or Miss or Ms. They, the ladies would sometimes have to define for me, because we have three guys are misters. Everyone, the women have a choice.
Yeah, men have no choice. That's equal.
And if I had a trans student, I would have just, if they'd have said, would you call me Janie? And I'd said, no, but I'll call you Miss, whatever your last name is. But be aware of the fact that other students may look at that strangely, and they're allowed to do that. They're allowed to think that's unusual. And you don't have a right to be offended by that. I will respect you as a person, but you also have to respect them as a person. And if they get to know you, they may think you're fine. It may not. You may actually bridge a gap here, but shouting at people will not convince any people anything but that they should shut up. And that's, of course, what's going on here. People want people to shut up. That would go back to what happened this week on last Saturday was on the August 31st in Boston. They had the Straight Pride Parade.
Uh-oh.
Oh, it was very funny. I mean, it was well organized, and it had only a few hundred people participating in it, almost all men. And their motto was, "It's great to be straight." It's the idea that you should be able to have saying, well, if I'm supposed to accept your sexual preferences, you should be willing to accept mine. And it sounds quite reasonable. It was peaceful as far as the parade was concerned. The Grand Marshal of the parade was Milo Yiannopoulos.
And the trigger warning in safe space culture has started to take root even in the best institutions in the country. My view on this is that anybody who asks for a safe space or a trigger warning should be immediately expelled. They have demonstrated... They have demonstrated that they are incapable of meeting the requirements of their course. Why are you here? Why are you here if not to discover new ways of looking at the world, to discover thinkers and ideas, history, stuff you never imagined that was possible, to broaden your intellectual horizons? If you're not prepared to do that, go home, leave.
The audience, anyone listening doesn't know. I mean,
nobody's listening.
Yeah, well, nobody's listening, but I'm going to talk anyway.
Okay.
Milo Yiannopoulos is of course, a conservative homosexual. He's about as gay a guy as you can get, and is very conservative. So, I mean, he was a tremendously funny idea for the Grand Marshal, but he has that kind of sense of humor. And of course, there were more protesters against the parade than people who were actually in the parade. About 2 to 1.
Wow.
And the one there, of course, on the side, they had to be held back by the police. There were about approximately 40 arrests, and as far as I could tell from my research, none of them were the parade participants. They were all the Antifa people on the sides, the protesters screaming that they're homophobic, screaming that they're Nazis, screaming that they're all these horrible people, when all they're actually saying is, I'm a straight guy and I'm happy being a straight guy. Guess what? I'm 99% of the world. I mean, it's just weird. I mean, what was the saying? One of them, I am straight, hear me roar, was one of the ones they were yelling too. And of course, the protesters were all pointing at, the ones against it, is there were a lot of Make America Great hats, and there was a Trump 2020 float in the parade. Because again, they're saying a lot of them were more conservative. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I was watching some video on it. There's one guy in the crowd who was chanted out that Boston doesn't want you and we outnumber you. And I go, gee, what a tolerant thought process that person was putting forth. The police got a little roughed up over it too, but in the long run, everything worked out okay. They did all their permits. Unlike most parades and protests that happen, people do it and the police just kind of ignore it, or the government. They actually got, because Boston would have stopped them if they could. They had to make sure that all the permits were in place, everything they needed to do. And it ended with speeches in the end at City Hall, and Milo was there, and apparently it was actually kind of a nice event.
But the way the media portrays it, it was a hate thing, like people promoting hate. Which
is strange. Then what, heterosexuality promotes hate? I thought heterosexuality promoted propagation of the human species.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, but again, apparently, you and I are, of course, racist, homophobic, bigoted, whatever. And the funny thing about that, I've reached a point in my life that if someone starts calling me that, I'm almost really willing to say, thank you for proving to me that you ran out of arguments. The organization that funded it is called Super Happy Fun America. Another strange thing, I guess, in the same mentality of weird cities that happened is, and this just happened in the news very recently, is that the San Francisco City Council declared the NRA a national terrorist organization, which of course it's purely a stunt because they have no authority to declare a terrorist organization. Right. And I go, you really want to be careful about who you're picking a fight with. San Francisco has about 1 million people. The NRA has about 6 million people. That's a weird way of thinking about it. The NRA has about 5 or 6 million people, depending on which data you look at on it. There are 3 million active military person in the United States and about 1 million cops, which means that NRA membership has more than the Army and the cops combined. I'm not saying that in any sort of grim way, but it's odd that here's people who are saying the main thing about most people who member the NRAs that I've met is they're for the Second Amendment. Most people I've met are NRA people are hunters. Aberdeen Grays Harbor, I mean, there's probably way more NRA members in Grays Harbor than there are law enforcement officers in Grays Harbor. So if North Korea ever invades, I guess we'll can yell for the NRA people to come and help the cops. It's just really strange. It's just a stunt because San Francisco, they wouldn't do something just to be virtue signaling, right? I mean, the San Francisco City Council is a sober government organization, helping its people. Okay, I did as long as I could. I'm sorry, I finally started to laugh. I can't stop myself.
I'm wondering if they wanted to help people so much, the politicians, the government workers, their salaries are like double of the average like employee in a similar field, why don't they shave off some of their doubled salary and give it to someone else who doesn't make as much?
Well, that would actually mean you're trying to solve the problem rather than just virtue signal. I mean, that's the thing on that. People always they talk about that. It's the whole idea about socialism. I have a hard time, you're talking about San Francisco likes the socialist ideas, but yet when you say, well, then maybe your city employees should make less money and we could pay our other people more, well, they aren't going to do that because then they've got unions behind it. I mean, I have a hard time listening to Bernie Sanders yell at me about socialism when he's worth a couple $1 million and has 3 houses.
In the United States Congress today, approximately 20% of the members of Congress themselves are millionaires. Millionaires, 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 billionaires, millionaires, 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 to the millionaire and billionaire, millionaires and billionaires. Tax breaks to billionaires and millionaires, millionaires and billionaires, millionaires and billionaires, millionaires and billionaires, millionaires and billionaires, millionaires and billionaires.
Oh, but now Bernie's changed his stance. Notice how he doesn't say millionaire anymore.
What my campaign is about is standing up to the billionaire class, Wall Street billionaires, billionaire, 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 tax breaks for billionaires. If the billionaire class hates me or hates other progressives, we should be proud of that. Billionaire, 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 Wall Street and the billionaire class, Wall Street, corporate America, or the billionaire class, billionaire, 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 handful of billionaires. Stand up to the billionaire, 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 billionaires, billionaire, 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 billionaires, billionaires, billionaires. I am prepared to take on the billionaire class. Billionaires, a handful of billionaires. It will not be tax breaks for billionaires.
And Liz Warren's worth more than he is, and she's basically decided she's Bernie in a Liz suit now. I mean, she's just picked up his policies and is trying to run with it because she figures I'm young and I'm a woman, I'll do better than he will, because we all know he's an old curmudgeon. I keep waiting for Bernie Sanders to stand up in the middle of a political speech and yell, "Get off my lawn, you kids."
Now, didn't Elizabeth Warren lie about her ethnicity to make gain?
She gamed the system. Her argument was, well, my family told me that we have Native American. I have high cheekbones. Boy, I've heard that. Donald Trump has more than Liz Warren. I mean, but in her case, she gamed the system because she had claimed to have it, and then when she finally got caught on it, of course, she had to say it wasn't true. And the stupidest thing you can possibly do is she did a DNA test that gave like 1/164th or something, Cherokee Native American blood.
And we should note that the Cherokee Nation criticized Warren's announcement, saying that her use of the DNA test is inappropriate and, quote, undermining tribal interests, with her continued claims of tribal heritage.
Anything else going on that has jumped out at the professor?
We were trying to be a little lighter, but we did, of course, have another shooting incident in Texas. That was a big thing on the news.
I was thinking about this. I've noticed that a lot of these incidents happen, and they're Democrats, but they don't. You really have to dig to find that information out. The press isn't mentioning that most, if not all, of these crazy people, besides the fact that they're crazy, the one thing they have in common is they're all Democrats. Now, it's Democrats that want to ban guns, and then you have Democrats that are trying to push this. Then you have Democrats that are going out doing a lot of these horrible things.
Well, I would tend to think when you check the political background of people, a lot of them are hard to even define what they are. Most of them have in common. If you're talking about mass shootings, most of them tend to be loners. They tend to be white males. There's certain the one main thing they have in common is the issue when you're talking about guns is they're crazy. I mean, that's what it is. People keep talking about guns. Like everyone says, if you get rid of the AR-15s, then we're going to live in a land of milk and honey without any violence, excluding the fact, of course, that the majority of homicides by guns are done by handguns. And that most people that die by guns in the United States are from suicide. I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with that. But you are right. When we had the shooting in Texas, the one that was happening in El Paso, and then at the same time the next day we had one in Dayton, Ohio. The Dayton, Ohio person was a Liz Warren supporter, and the guy in Texas was a nationalist, but he was also an environmental radical person, which tends to lean more toward the left. So your argument's probably valid in that they both had leftist leanings, but I think left goes more toward anarchy, and people that are loners tend to be more anarchists. So I could see the way that would work. It's just a shame. And the last shooting that thing happened, the guy that did it was he apparently went to his work was acting irrational. They fired him, and then the highway patrol pulled him over, and he shot at one of the officers there, and it turned into a kind of a running situation. He got a mail truck. He killed the mail carrier. It wasn't that it didn't sound like he was just crazy. Mm-hmm. He'd been driven, he went over the edge, and he just went crazy. I don't know what his politics are, because I don't think they've told, I don't even know his name. And honestly, I don't really want to know his name, because I think it's a huge mistake to glorify these people, because you're just making more people want to do it. Right. There are plenty of fringe, crazy-ass people out there who will have no problem imitating.
I saw someone post a Reddit photo of their child that this crazy person wrapped a rope around his neck and started strangling him. It had this big rope burn around his neck, and the person had said, this has nothing to do with guns. It has to do with mental health, and it's a problem.
And that's exactly what it is.
Because they're just going to go get something. They're just going to hop in a van and mow people down, or they're just going to assault a kid on the street with a rope, or they're going to find things no matter what it is.
Well, and the thing about it is, in the month of August, there were 3 mass shootings. The total of the mass shootings of those people, Chicago's deaths for that month of August, they beat all the mass shootings by about 8. In other words, almost 60 people in Chicago were killed in the same time about 50 people were killed in mass shootings in the United States, other places. But no one's talking about those 60 people dying in Chicago. Somehow, are their lives of less value because they were killed 1 or 2 at a time? Or is it because almost all of the deaths in Chicago are on the south side of Chicago, which of course is the ethnic black part of Chicago? So is it the Democrats want to limit guns, but the black lives apparently don't matter to them, because Chicago's losing them left and right, and nobody's yelling about that. People like to talk about guns, but they forget about the fact that you have a Second Amendment, and we have a right to bear arms. If you want to change it, then amend the Constitution. If not, then shut the hell up.
The biggest argument I hear is, it was for a different time, a different era. We had muskets then. Okay, then if you want to make that argument, you can, but I don't think a gun control person wants to make that argument. What weapon did a soldier have in the Continental Army to fight against the British? He had a musket. And we're saying, it was okay for civilians to have military-grade weapons, because a musket was a military-grade weapon. If we have the right to bear arms when the Constitution was written, then they're saying that modern people should have the same weapons as soldiers, because that's what they did then. Thomas Jefferson said the strongest reason for the people to retain the right to keep and bear arms is, as a last resort, to protect themselves from the tyranny of a government. People think this mythical idea that the right to bear arms is to stop criminals from attacking you. It's not. It's to stop the government from taking away your freedoms, which is exactly what we're talking about when we're dealing with what we're talking about now. You have people who want to take away your weapons because they want to control you. They ultimately want to have control over your lives, because an unarmed population is easy to get to do what you want them to. Stalin learned that lesson, so did Hitler, so did Mao. Well, they're trying it here, it seems like.
Well, that's what people are talking about it. Like, see, I'll give you another thought. Ben Franklin, they that give up their essential liberty to obtain temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. I'll quote Ben Franklin on it too. The idea that if you're giving up if you're saying, well, we need to take away people's weapons because it'll make us more safe, but you're also losing your ability to keep yourself safe. Because if a person shows up at your house and is robbing your house and you don't have a gun, the only thing you can do is call the police or take after them with handheld weapons. If they have a gun, you're going to lose. And when a gun commits violence, a person with a gun commits violence, that violence will continue until the person either runs out of ammunition or another gun shows up to stop them. The issue is not the weapon, the issue is mental health, and that's a whole other matter. There are common sense things that people can do, but no one seems to want common sense because they're trying to appeal to a base because it's an election year.
Well, and they do say, and I sound like a broken record, our IQs are declining rapidly.
Well, I think the current crop of presidential candidates probably will verify your thesis there. There are a lot of them that I looked at and went, can you tie your shoes? It would be the question I would ask some of them.
Well, it's Johnny and the Professor, and coming up, Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. More Marvel, and our YouTube friend, the critical drinker.
Who is this guy? How did the most optimistic, hopeful character in the galaxy turn into this hermit who says it's time for the Jedi to end? I read that and I said, what? That's not what a Jedi does. I mean, a Jedi is optimistic. A Jedi has tenacity. He never gives up. He doesn't secrete himself on an island, but you'll see. I mean, the wait for 8 is nearly over.
You're listening to Johnny and the Professor. Common sense in senseless times. This is Johnny and the Professor. Common sense in senseless times. Contact the show at jpshowfm@gmail.com.
There's never been a time in English common law history where the government compelled speech.
Johnny and the Professor.
It's Johnny and the Professor, where, well, we just talk about all sorts of stuff. Pop culture, politics, poetry, past participles.
Provoking, prevaricating. Let's see, what else starts
propaganda.
with a P? Pusillanimous.
Peas.
Pulchritude. How's that? That's
poultry.
Nice. Poultry, we can talk about poultry, unless you're chicken.
Oh,
yeah, I know. And they're punnery. How about that?
Okay, paniatry, is that a word? I just thought I made it up.
I think you just made it up. I don't think
paniatry. Let's make it mean something then. Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Now, there have been all sorts of leaks or rumors. There's one circulating the Google machine now that seems to have some substance for whatever reason. Do I let you know, jeopardizing ruining your life in case of spoilers and stuff?
All you have to say, and this is what they do on YouTube, is spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. Johnny's going to do a spoiler alert. Okay, you've been warned. Cover your ears and go la 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 la.
If you're still listening and this rumor is in fact true and it does ruin your life because you had a movie spoiled, then I'm sorry.
You need a better life then.
Right. If a movie spoiler ruins your life, then yeah, you got problems bigger than that. But okay, this is what I heard. Take it with a grain of salt. Take it or leave it.
Even 2 grains of salt.
Exactly. Apparently, we're going to start out with like a flashback. Shocker. Luke is training Leia, the Jedi arts. Leia finds out she's pregnant with Ben Solo, so she decides to, for some reason, quit, even though, if you know anything about Star Wars and the Force and Jedi, keeping with it would probably protect her baby more than anything, but she decides to quit, and Luke opposes, so they have a duel that Luke loses, of course.
Because he's a guy.
Because he's a man. He's a male, a toxic male. Must lose. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Being toxic male?
The losing.
Oh.
And then Leia goes and doesn't take a job in government. She takes a job as a general. But anyway, Rey is apparently Palpatine's granddaughter. Now, when Kylo Ren said your parents were nobodies, well, yeah, her parents were nobodies, but her grandfather wasn't. They're looking for these, like, Sith artifacts. There's 2 of them. One's a knife. I forgot what the other one was. So Kylo's looking for them. Rey's looking for them. I don't remember why, but it has to do with Palpatine. That's why in one of the trailer shots, you'll see them in front of, like, the crashed Death Star. That has to be the moon of Endor, I think, or one of the moons of Endor. Apparently one of them is there, and they're both trying to find these. Palpatine apparently wants Rey,
who is the Emperor from
former Emperor
from the Star Wars movies. Yeah,
he apparently wants Rey and Kylo Ren to rule the galaxy together. Instead of being the selfish Sith who are always, introverted and always selfish and things like that, he suddenly wants her to rule the universe with Kylo Ren.
So they're going to call him Grand Palpatine now, probably?
Something like that. When you see the shot of C-3PO with red eyes, apparently an alien has programmed him. He was unable to read the language embedded in this Sith artifact. So this alien has to program him in order for him to read it, and that's why his eyes turn red. Now, you could find this theory on YouTube. A lot of the big channels are talking about it because it kind of makes sense. I could see them going this way, especially after the disaster of Rian Johnson. We'll talk about that here in a minute. In the end, there's another duel between Rey and Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren actually dies, and then Rey just wants to quit, give it up, go hide like Luke did when Rian Johnson ruined The Last Jedi. Did I say that out loud?
Yes.
But then Luke comes to her as a Force ghost and gives her back her lightsaber and says, don't, you need to carry on or something like that. And then finally, somehow the Emperor's destroyed. There's more to it. It's a lot more detailed than I just gave. I gave kind of just an overall kind of thing. Because if you want better than that, you'll have to kind of just look it up.
Well, the first question I would ask is, why is it called The Rise of Skywalker then?
That's a good question. I think Ben Solo comes back to kind of redeem himself in some capacity in this.
Yeah, we've never seen that before in a Star Wars movie.
Right. So I don't know. Between Luke bringing her lightsaber back, the one that was destroyed, I think, in the last one when it was pulled apart, somehow that got fixed, and then Yoda being able to do the Force lightning in the Last Jedi.
Well, it wasn't just Force lightning. I mean, the bad guys can throw that. He called down a lightning bolt. I mean,
right.
If he could do that against people in a battle, Jedis would, so much for the Sith.
I want to read an email we got to the show about this. It says, "Dear Johnny and the Professor, love the show. Thanks. What is your problem with The Last Jedi? I thought it was a great movie. Please elaborate. Signed, Ken in Cosmopolis." Well, Ken in Cosmopolis, thanks for the compliment for one. Do you want to go through this one? You could probably articulate it much better than I can with what the problems with The Last Jedi, where Rian Johnson dropped the ball, where he didn't understand where he fit in this whole sequel thing, where he went into business for himself, didn't follow anything.
Well, I think that the line, Mark Hamill probably speaks of it best.
I told Ryan, I fundamentally disagree with virtually everything you've decided about my character. It was as shocking to me to read what Ryan had written, as I'm sure it will be for the audience.
They made him into a bumbling kind of fool who in the end just destroyed himself by overextending his energies for no apparent reason I could tell. I mean, other than scaring the hell out of him that he made this big projection of himself across the universe. It's like, why are you, what was the point of this? And the point is, well, Ren is a sacred cow and she's going to be able to do whatever she wants because she can be a master. Of course, wouldn't she be a mistress of the Force? You don't want to use any toxic male terms for that, so that she could actually, and she can be the new one carrying along. But Rian Johnson, he didn't have any idea what he was doing.
I like to say that he didn't understand or doesn't understand Star Wars, but then also doesn't understand writing a sequel and maybe even writing a movie. He said he's a horrible writer.
I don't think I could ever actually write for a living, write for hire, because I take so long to write, and I just it's bad, man. It's no good.
And he's obviously an honest man then.
In this regard, right?
In this regard, at least.
But if you don't like his movie, you're a toxic male, man baby. I don't know if you knew this, but anybody who criticized the movie were called names, man baby, get out of your parents' basement, you hate women, you hate strong women, things like that.
Oh, I know, because they had all these female characters that were the dominant force in it, and all the men were bumbling fools. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing about that is there's an old thing about Nietzsche said that a fanatic is someone who redoubles his efforts whenever he loses sight of his goals. And this is exactly what they're talking about here. Women are trying to be more toxic male than men about this. They're trying to push men down and hold them in place.
Now, all women?
Well, I mean, the venomous feminist version of them, at least. The ones that want to do the feminist movement, the ones that were backing that movie, because that movie was silly. You had all these there was no interesting characters in that whole movie. That's a problem with movies in general. If I don't care about your characters, why would I want to watch your movie? The movie that I cared about the characters in was Rogue One, and then they killed all of those off.
Yeah, they did, didn't they?
They're killing the characters off in the wrong movies. You should kill the characters off in the normal Star Wars movies and let the ones from Rogue One survive and be your new storyline. That would have been a better movie.
I think we need to clear up that nobody has a problem with strong female characters.
I don't, strong. I mean, Ripley from Alien is one of my all-time favorite characters. I mean, she's strong, but again, there are a lot of good female characters around there. If you only prove you're strong by pushing other people down, then what you are is a bully. Then and when you complain about it, and if I say, well, you shouldn't be doing that, and you cry and scream, well, that makes you what, a cry bully then? Well, I mean, if the men are having to be man babies and cry babies, then the ones who are pushing down the men are cry bullies.
Spider-Man. We talked about Spider-Man last week, about the whole Marvel Sony thing.
There's something new on it because I haven't seen it yet.
The latest rumors that I've been hearing are they're still in talks. It's not It's not over yet. But I have a lot of people that I'm running into that are fine with Spider-Man leaving the Marvel Universe. It's not a big deal.
I personally am one of those people. I wouldn't have a problem with it. But apparently Disney's trying to bring them back, and they better be careful, for forever will the dark side dominate them if they do that. Well, my big reason I would like Spider-Man to stop being in the Marvel Universe is I'd like Spider-Man just to have his superpowers and be Spider-Man.
Right. Instead of having to rely on Tony Stark.
Iron Man's armor. I mean, I'm sorry, Pepper Potts was, it has been in the Marvel movies, and she gets to be tough in game because she has Iron Man's suit on. Of course, I guess she did do something in Iron Man 3 where she ended up with superpowers too. But I mean, it's J. Jonah Jameson in Iron Man armor could be a superhero. That doesn't, that doesn't mean a thing. And whereas Spider-Man has powers, and yet you're putting him in, it's like, well, gee, everybody should have Iron Man armor. Let's put the Hulk in a battle armor.
I've noticed a lot of people that are okay with Spider-Man leaving Marvel. That was their biggest thing. Spider-Man doesn't need to rely on Iron Man or Tony Stark on his stuff to be Spider-Man.
And if you ever read the old Spider-Man comics, Parker was always really clever, and he would sometimes invent stuff in one of the issues. He would use his sciencey thing, and he'd devise something that could defeat a bad guy. One-time invention only used in this issue to take out Electro or something. But they did that every once in a while. But he was only able to use it because he had his Spyro powers, because he was so insanely fast and strong and all that to go with it. And that makes a much more interesting hero than just saying, I not only can lift 10 tons and move faster than the eye can see, I get to run around in battle armor too. And I think armor would slow Spider-Man down, actually, because he's insanely fast, precognitively fast even.
What do you think about the Black Widow movie? Do you think it's coming out too late since it's a prequel movie? Do you think people have already moved on? I mean, Black Widow was a great character, and I think they introduced her really good too.
I think Spider-Man should never date her, though, for obvious reasons. Well, she is a Black Widow after all.
But
okay, but I thought, again, I'll give you an unpopular opinion here. I never really cared much for the Black Widow character, period, in the comics or in the movies. Nothing against the actress that does it. I'm drawing a blank on her name, actually.
Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah. But I never really thought that much. Her best performances was in Winter Soldier, I thought. So I mean, I don't have a big. I think prequels are boring because there's not going to be any threat to the character. If you're telling me her backstory, okay, well, we know she's going to live through the movie, so there's no tension because she has to live through the movie because she has to be killed on the Red Skull's world where the Soul Gem is in Endgame. Spoiler alert.
Hey, if you haven't seen Endgame by now, hey, that's on you.
Yeah, like you said, then you need to crawl out of your cave. And I only watched it once though, because that was enough for me. And I wanted those 3 hours back when I was done.
Black Widow, strong female character.
I can agree with all that too.
She can kick butt with the best of them.
Well, and the thing about her, even in a lot of ways, the argument a better character than, say, the Hulk, because the Hulk is insanely powerful. So he has to find people that are just even tough enough to fight him. Everybody the Black Widow fights, a group of gunmen is a threat to the Black Widow. A group of gunmen is even a nuisance to the Hulk.
Speaking of Hulk, rumor is they're trying to do a Hulk versus Wolverine movie.
Okay, if the Hulk's a bleeder, then that's an issue. You want history on that? The Wolverine originally appeared in the Hulk issues. I think it's like Hulk 127 or something.
Yeah.
Incredible Hulk, drawn by Herb Trimp, his famous Hulk artist. And he popped in an issue where the Hulk was fighting the Wendigo up in Canada. And that's his first appearance, and it's worth an insane amount of money. I mean, $10,000 or something for that comic now.
Terminator Dark Fate.
I've saw previews for it with Sarah Connors and an old Terminator too.
Right. A lot of people are pointing out some poor writing in just what they've seen in the previews.
Well, first question I would ask, there's an old Terminator. Didn't he get melted? Didn't he go into the lava or the molten metal in Terminator 2?
Yeah, and then she tries to shoot him when she first sees him, too, in this trailer.
Okay.
It's like, that's not going to do it. If she knows what he's capable of, what he's made of,
unless you have armor-piercing rounds.
Something.
I like I said, I'm a weak one on this. You probably know more about than I do because I've only really seen Terminator and Terminator 2.
Okay.
Everything else I've just picked up from previews and talking to people.
Right. Just the previews of this doesn't look all that good.
Well, I mean, I do like the Sarah Connor character is an interesting character. Was it Linda Hamilton is the actress? Yeah. I've enjoyed her work, so I'm a little bit, I like seeing her work in general.
She's a strong female.
She's a very strong female character you want to talk about. She's an identical twin, Linda Hamilton.
I don't know if I knew that or not.
Yeah, in the scene in Terminator where there's two of her, and the one is the T-1000 and the other is her with the shotgun. Mm-hmm. The one with the one getting shot, I think, it was actually her identical twin.
Wow.
They didn't have, that was a great CGI effect because they didn't have to CGI it. They had two people that looked alike. So that one worked for that. And I was reading some stuff on her recently. So I like the actress, so I have a soft spot for her in that way. The Terminator, like a lot of things, turned into a mishmash mess of whatever, and I think maybe they're trying to do a movie in the end that fixes everything.
Let's hope, shall we?
Well, let's hope. That is ultimately, that's back to the old Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. That's what a lot of people are hoping, is maybe they'll just merge the old one and the new one together and kind of forget the ones in the middle.
I want you to hear what my friend the Critical Drinker has to say about this.
As my parole officer knows all too well, it's important to give people second chances in life. We don't always get things right first time around, and sometimes the best laid plans go awry for reasons beyond our control. So it was with the trailer for Terminator Dark Fate. You may remember I wasn't exactly complimentary about it the first time around, but maybe it was a glitch, I thought. Just some quirk of bad editing and a lack of decent footage to work with that made the movie seem like a tired and desperate rehash of overused concepts, feebly milking the nostalgia of veteran franchise stars that are way past their prime, all packaged up with a bunch of bland, charisma-free blocks of wood and an unhealthy dollop of 2019 identity politics on the side. Maybe it was nothing more than bad luck that made this movie look like the kind of unmitigated disaster that's destined to put Ghostbusters 2016 to shame. So when the time came, I dutifully tuned in to watch the second extended trailer that rolled out a couple of days ago, and now that I've seen it, my concerns have totally vanished, and then promptly returned with a bunch of roided up mates to totally ruin my day. So the trailer begins with Androgynous Thing lying on a bed with its eyes closed. I don't think any of us want to see it in that kind of position, and dreaming about how best to smash the patriarchy when it's rudely awoken by old Sarah Connor with a gun pointed at its face, demanding that it talk, and talk fast. Well, that's a unique way to open a conversation. I know it might seem pedantic to point out that context matters, but in this case it would be useful to have some kind of setup for what's going on here. What exactly do you want Androgynous Thing to talk about, old Sarah Connor? The weather? The current state of Brexit? The chances of Hulk Hogan doing another WrestleMania? Anyway, Androgynous Thing is like, nah, it'll be fine, so it leaps up and pins old Sarah Connor against the wall and makes an equally vague demand in return. Jesus, how do people in this universe ever get meaningful information out of each other if they just walk around threatening total strangers and barking talk at them? Nah, whatever. So old Sarah Connor gives us a lowdown on everything that happened in Terminator 2. Remember Terminator 2, everyone? Remember that movie from like 30 years ago that everyone loved, and they didn't make another one for more than a decade because James Cameron knew there was no way to improve on it or logically move the story forward without rehashing the same concept yet again. Keep that in mind here. So old Sarah Connor finishes up by explaining she was responsible for stopping Skynet, Judgment Day, and saving the entire human race. Wow, way to take credit for other people's work, Sarah. I guess Miles Dyson's sacrificing himself and leaving his young family without a father to prevent his life's work being misused, or the T-800 killing the Liquid Terminator, saving your life, and willingly ending its own existence to stop history repeating itself don't count anymore. Nah, it was all down to you, and now there's nobody left alive to say any different. Anyway, I guess saving the world isn't enough to impress Androgynous Thing, because it's like, you didn't stop Judgment Day, you just delayed it. Where have I heard that line before?
But we stopped Judgment Day.
You only postponed it. Judgment Day is inevitable.
Oh great, good to know we're both rehashing the plot of a mediocre entry in the franchise, as well as undermining the events of the very best in the series. Great work, Dark Fate. All you need to do now is show Kyle Reese being convicted of chicken molesting and your work is complete. So then we get a bunch of shots of the post-apocalyptic future that's waiting for us, which we've seen a million times before, only this time it's about as exciting as the plot of Terminator Salvation. Where's all the fighting and the HKs getting blown up and people getting run over? Then we get to see the arrival of the Apple Genius through the time vortex. Wow, way to build up the menace and power of your antagonist, Dark Fate. Have you been taking lessons from Lucasfilm? Then old Sarah Connor tells us, again, that she's never seen a Terminator-like androgynous thing before, like it almost seems human. Shame it doesn't actually talk like a human.
I know you're scared, but I'm here to protect you.
An androgynous thing is like, I am human. Where have I heard this conversation before?
You think you're human? I am human.
You know, I've got a few questions about this character. So androgynous thing is a human that's been enhanced with machine technology to become a kind of proto-Terminator for use in the war against the machines. Really? Why? How? In every single vision we've ever had of the future war, the human resistance is portrayed as a bunch of scrappy guerrilla fighters operating out of basements and abandoned tunnels. Their weapons and equipment are basically whatever they've been able to scavenge up or cobble together. They don't have the sophisticated research labs or manufacturing facilities needed to compete with the machines technologically. They win through a combination of ingenuity, improvisation, sacrifice, and of course the leadership of John Connor. Oh wait, he doesn't exist anymore. Can't imply that a man could be the saviour of mankind now, can we?
We like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind, because it's more inclusive.
There we go.
Off, Justin Trudeau. How did the human resistance obtain the medical, scientific and engineering knowledge, not to mention the enormous resources needed to create something like androgynous thing? And why bother devoting the huge amount of desperately needed resources to a project like that when they've got plenty of regular soldiers who can do the job just as effectively? Is it because the writers wanted a Kyle Reese kind of character again, but because it's a theoretical woman this time, they had to make it super strong and tough so they could show the actress easily beating up men twice her size and smashing the patriarchy? I'll let you decide. Then I guess it's time to remind us about the McGuffin of the movie, the generic teenage girl who still looks just as boring and unremarkable as before. Remember John Connor, everyone? Remember how interesting it was to see the future saviour of the human race portrayed as an asshole delinquent kid with floppy early 90s hair? Remember how Edward Furlong made him kind of cool and likeable and funny, while also giving him a strong element of humanity and morality that ultimately brings his mother back from the brink of becoming a murderous psychopath? Those were the good days. Now what have we got? An absolute block of wood who looks and sounds about as interesting as the jail cell I woke up in this morning. And then the trailer ends with this cool, unique line that we've never heard before.
I'll be back.
It seems oddly familiar, though.
I'll be back.
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 Ha! You did not gonna say that, did you?
I'd like to point out that there's a fine line between homage and plagiarism. Terminator Dark Fate has got Trainwreck written all over it, and I'm not talking about that god-awful Amy Schumer film either. This second trailer has only served to confirm my suspicions that Dark Fate is nothing but a hodgepodge of stale, recycled ideas, nostalgia baiting with the return of Arnold and Hamilton long after they stopped giving a about the Terminator franchise, and an ultimately doomed attempt to introduce the wannabe action icon with absolutely none of the charisma, acting ability, or deep characterization of her predecessor. In short, Dark Fate's only real accomplishment is likely to be to remind us of how good the first two Terminator movies were, and why 90% of the stuff coming out of Hollywood today absolutely sucks. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
You can find The Critical Drinker on YouTube. Well, that'll do it for this episode of Johnny and the Professor. If you would like to email us, or if you want to send in questions for Judge Janine Pirro next week, email jpshowfm@gmail.com.
Or you can always find my YouTube channel, which you do a search for Arena of History, and you'll find my new videos that I've put up.
This has been Johnny and the Professor. Common sense in senseless times. Contact the show at jpshowfm@gmail.com.